A very good morning to all our listeners. I'm Monica Chong, a disputes lawyer at Wong Partnership in Singapore. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Erika Williams, a leading arbitration lawyer based in Brisbane. Erika and I met several years ago. We were introduced by a common friend over dinner in Singapore and have since had many opportunities to catch up in the region. Over many delightful meals and glasses of wine, I have learned that Erika's journey into arbitration is anything but conventional, and it's always so inspiring to me to see women forging their own paths. So today I'm super excited to hear all about the decisions that have joined the dots to where Erika is right now, having very successfully set up her own independent arbitration practice in Brisbane. So welcome, Erika, once again to Singapore. Is the humidity here something you think you'll ever get used to?
I must say I needed some extra hairspray to try and keep the frizz out of my hair today. So no, it's nothing I'm going to get used to.
That's all of us here. Anyway, I thought we'd start from the very beginning. Your path into arbitration has been quite unique. You spent, I think, 6 years working in various jobs before attending law school. What were some of those roles, and how do you think they influenced your decision to pursue a career in the law more broadly and in arbitration specifically?
Yes, thank you, Monica. I actually, when I finished high school, went to high school in Japan for another year on exchange to try and hone my language skills. And that led me into various roles when I returned back to Australia, the first of which was on Hamilton Island, a beautiful resort island in the Whitsundays on the Great Barrier Reef. So I was a Japanese guest liaison person at a hotel there for a year, and then I was actually a wedding planner for Japanese couples coming to
Amazing.
Hamilton Island to get married. I then decided to move back to Japan for a few more years to improve my language further, and I sat the Japanese language proficiency exam, the top level, while I was there. This is 20-something years ago, so it's a long time ago. But I was working at the Australian Embassy in Tokyo while I was studying, and all the diplomats had law degrees. So I said to my boss at the time that I was going to go back to Australia and get a law degree and have a secretary of my own one day. And that's what I did.
And in all of those experiences, was there a specific moment during that period of time that sparked your interest in the law and eventually arbitration?
It was actually a one chance encounter with someone who I couldn't even identify. It was someone at a dinner through a mutual friend said that she was doing an aviation arbitration case and explained to me what arbitration was. And I thought how amazing it would be to have a career with these international elements, given that I'd been living overseas. And it was that conversation that caused me to tell my boss that I was going to get a law degree. And I knew before I even started I was going to be an arbitration practitioner.
That's wonderful. Are you still in touch with that friend?
No, I couldn't even tell you who it was. So this chance encounter changed my life.
Amazing. And you now practice out of Brisbane. How would you describe the arbitration scene in Brisbane, and how did you come to adopt that as your base?
Yes, I'd call the arbitration scene small. I actually did my first 5 years of practice after I finished university in Sydney. So I was at Baker McKenzie for 5 years, and I found that the arbitration practice in Sydney, because there's so many large law firms there vying for the same sort of work, everyone gets a small piece of the pie at the different firms, whereas when I moved up to Brisbane, there's less firms vying for a similar amount of work because, you know, Queensland has a big mining resources, energy, infrastructure market, so there's still a lot of work, just less people vying for the same work. So I found that when I moved to Queensland, I actually was able to do more arbitration work than I could when I was in Sydney.
Yeah, that's very interesting because small is also how some people would describe Singapore.
Yes.
But in a different sense, it's small in size, but there are a lot of people here. So that sounds like a very different scene in Brisbane.
Yes, I think the arbitration market in Singapore might be small, but there's many arbitration practitioners. Brisbane might be much bigger, but there are less arbitration practitioners.
Yeah, and I think that's also might have to do with the fact that Brisbane is not traditionally associated with arbitration.
I wouldn't call it a hub for international arbitration, no.
And are there challenges in establishing yourself in a city that's not traditionally associated as an arbitration hub?
Well, I actually have to look at COVID as providing a silver lining, because I set up my independent practice in 2021 during COVID. So I really think that the world became more accessible and your physical location became almost irrelevant. So I was very fortunate that, COVID was an awful thing, but many good things did come out of it. And one of that is being able to practice internationally from wherever you are.
Yeah. And you mentioned 2021, that was the year you launched Williams Arbitration. I think that was around the time we met.
That is, it would have been maybe March, just after I launched that you and I met, yes.
Yes, and what were the key drivers to starting your own independent practice, if you're able to share that with us?
Well, the partner I was working with at the firm I was at in Brisbane, he decided to leave to set up his own independent practice as an arbitrator. And so then I was left to contemplate whether I wanted to stay with that firm, which didn't really have much of an arbitration focus without that partner. And so I decided to leave the firm, and I was quickly approached by ACICA, the Australian Centre for International Commercial Arbitration, to consult to them as counsel. And another international arbitration firm in Sydney asked me to consult to them. Again, it didn't matter that I was in Brisbane, because by this stage everyone was comfortable working together, even if we weren't physically together. So that gave me the launch pad to set up my own practice.
Right, and having launched and now practicing out of Williams Arbitration, is there a particular focus area in terms of arbitration types of disputes that you tend to hear more frequently?
As arbitrator, I've been quite fortunate to have a broad variety of general commercial disputes. Although, as I mentioned, the Queensland market is mining and resources. And then more internationally, I've done some renewable energy cases to do with solar farms in Pacific Islands. And I had, relating to Singapore and Hong Kong, an oil and gas related case. So those are probably the main industries. But then I have unique little quirky ones at the moment. There's an end of lease dispute for a dairy farm, which is quite interesting, and a contract regarding providing social media marketing services. So yes, a broad variety, but there are some recurring industry type disputes.
And running your own independent practice as a business is, of course, a very different ball game from what you're probably used to before the launch of Williams Arbitration. I was wondering whether your previous experiences prepared you for the business aspects of running your own practice.
I think they have, not necessarily my pre-law experiences, but even working as an associate at firms, I've always been very big on business development. I think from my very first year, I said, how do I establish a career in arbitration in Australia? And the advice I was given was publish, publish, publish. So when I was at a firm, I used to publish probably 6 articles a year, which is, one every 2 months. I've tried to keep that up. I'm not as prolific as an independent arbitrator because, time is precious. But I do still publish. Networking is really important, and I used to do that at a firm, and now it's just networking for your own profile raising. And one of the more practical aspects is timesheets. You always have to do timesheets at a law firm, but when you convey that skill over to running an independent practice, if you don't do timesheets, you don't get paid. So that's a skill that's just as important as an independent practitioner than as an associate at a firm.
I thought that the advice of publish was so insightful, because what I sometimes tell the younger members of my team is that when you write something and you get it published, it's kind of forever. When you speak at a conference, you have an audience of maybe 50 or 100, but when you write something and you publish, that's there for posterity.
That's right.
Right. But what did you write on? Were these usually cases that you'd worked on, or was there a particular interest area that you had focused on?
So I often did publish on cases. One of the articles I'm most proud of, which I must update, I wrote it in 2020, so before I was independent. I went through and analysed all the investor state cases involving Australian claimants, and then this was at a time where there's only been one real investor state case against Australia. That was 2020, and my sort of overview of that was there was an increasing awareness of investor state arbitration in Australia. I think comparing 2020 to just 2025, there's been an exponential increase. I mean, I see cases involving Australia reported on quite regularly now, and when I wrote it in 2020, there'd been 14 cases in total.
Yep.
And it's certainly prolific. But yeah, now it's mainly just case notes because that's what I have time for. But as I said, I'm hoping to update my investor state article sometime soon.
And now that you're flying solo, I'm sure it comes with its own set of pros and cons. What have been some of the most rewarding and challenging aspects of flying solo?
Obviously, when you get the call up for an appointment and you're appointed as a sole arbitrator, co-arbitrator or presiding arbitrator, that's really rewarding because it's all your efforts paying off. Another reward is when you issue an award and you find out that it's been complied with. So recently I issued an award, said an amount had to be paid by a certain date. Actually, this has happened twice very recently. And it's come back when they apply for their costs that it's all been paid and all resolved. You know, one party might not be happy, but it's been resolved. So that's quite rewarding.
On that note of flying solo, I also wanted to touch on a topic that has been quite discussed pretty often here in Singapore, and that's on mentorship. Were there senior or mentor figures you were able to lean on in this journey of setting up your own practice?
Yes, well, fortunately, the same partner that left to set up on his own has remained a very good mentor figure and champion of mine. So quite often, when I have seriously challenging career decisions to make, even since I left the firm, I'll often send him a text and say, do you have time for a quick chat? So I really appreciate that. But outside of that, when I was setting up or contemplating setting up on my own, as I've mentioned, it was during COVID, so it was quite normal to reach out to have Zoom calls with people. Pre-COVID you might have had coffee with people, but because it was COVID, I could have Zoom calls with people anywhere. So I reached out just a few to name, like Judith Levine in Sydney, Lucy Martinez, who's also based in Queensland, and even now residing in Singapore, Brenda Horrigan. I reached out to all of those who'd gone out fairly recently before me and sought advice from them.
And for those who are considering sort of pursuing a similar path as you to set up an independent practice, do you have any specific advice to offer? And I'm interested also to hear your views on whether experience in an institution like Erika would be helpful to someone thinking about potentially setting up and flying solo.
Well, I'll pick up on the institutional experience. I suppose your reputation is the most important thing, and your profile. And so I would think that people who have institutional experience would have the reputation of really understanding how arbitration works and a deep experience in arbitration. And actually I had on here familiarise yourself with institutions, because it's often institutions who give people their first appointment. The other advice I had here was have coffee with everyone, or in my case, have Zoom call coffees with everyone, because you never know what you'll learn from them, or if you might make a connection that in the future they think someone might reach out to one of the people I've had coffee with and say, we're looking for an arbitrator who's got experience in this area, and you just never know who knows who. And one more very practical piece of advice I have is, once you're comfortable that you've got a reputation, you think the appointments will come, just beware that some institutions don't pay until the case is finished. So you might need a little bit of a nest egg to keep you going until those start coming in.
That's certainly very practical advice.
Yes.
This is also relevant to the topic of mentorship, which I think is linked to the question of forming connections, which you've just touched on. You named a couple of names, Judith, Lucy, and Brenda. How did you form those connections? How did you find those mentorship figures?
All of them lived in Australia, so I would have met them through events and functions in the arbitration community. But there's other less formal networks. So during COVID, Mute Off Thursdays was set up over in a European time zone, and for us in Australia, that's anywhere between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. when they were having their calls, which are quite difficult for people like me who go to bed early. So when that happened, again, Lucy and actually Qian Bao set up an amazing Asia-Pacific arbitration ladies informal network, and we would have Zoom calls. During COVID, it was every couple of months. It's eased off a little bit now, but just informal Zoom calls, no set agenda, just to connect. And that, now that we can all travel again now at various conferences and things in the region, there's usually an AAPALS breakfast or dinner where we can connect in person. So it's really just those informal connections where you've got no agenda, you just like the people. There's also more formal networks, and that's how you and I met, actually. AFIA, the Asia Pacific Forum for International Arbitration. I was consulting to a law firm, and the partner there knew you, and we were over here for a hearing in Singapore, and we're able to connect. I think it's just being open to connections and having lots of coffee.
That's so true. And I mean, above and beyond, those points that you made, I think what stood out is the fact that, you can lean on figures who are not limited to people in your firm, in your team, right? Just reach out, form the networks outside and see where that might potentially take you.
That's right. And one thing I always have in my mind, if I'm hesitant or not sure if someone would have time to meet with me, if you're sending them an email, what's the worst that could happen? They could not reply. Or even worse, they could say no, which that hasn't happened. Often people might say, I'm busy at the moment, but how about next month? But usually people will take the time. And if you put just a 30-minute Zoom calendar entry in the diary, then most people will make that time.
Yep. People are nicer than we think often. Well, before we wrap up, I had two last quick-fire questions before we end. The first was, what's a non-legal skill or hobby that you believe enhances your work as an arbitrator?
I think I have a very boring answer to this, but it's very appropriate. I love reading. So I often get up in the morning and I'll read a very trashy fiction for 20 minutes, 30 minutes if I'm feeling generous to myself. And then I have to put the book down and I can't reach out for it again till the next morning. But then I spend the rest of my day reading submissions and drafting awards, so it comes in handy.
Well, I guess there's a bit of balance in your daily reading list, it sounds like. Well, and last but not least, for parties who may appoint you as an arbitrator, what is a pet peeve they should be aware of?
Again, I mean, a lot of what I'm talking about still has the remnants of COVID, but now virtual hearings are fairly normal. But the problem with that is when you've got transcripts and you're doing a virtual hearing, it's really easy when cross-examining witnesses to cut them off or speak over them. And if the transcript is also being taken virtually, there's no hope or chance for that transcriber to catch. So I end up in a position where I've got a transcript with inaudible or cut off and it's really hard to go back over it. So, and I suppose associated with that is anyone who's disrespectful to opposing counsel. We're all just doing a job, and we're all colleagues in this profession. So they're the two things don't do if you're in a hearing before me.
I'm taking notes. Those are all duly noted.
I don't think you'd ever be disrespectful to an opposing counsel, Monica.
Well, Erika, it's been a real pleasure recording with you. Thank you for your time and for sharing so generously.
No, thank you. Thank you for your time. And we'll have to grab a wine soon.
Let's go.